Hey, Stephen, just one or two more questions here, and we're coming up against the hour very shortly. Niamh Garvey, who's another leader in among our development agencies here called TROCRA, she says, for a small country, albeit one with a good diplomatic profile, she's talking about Ireland here, what role can Ireland most meaningfully play in fostering global cooperation and promotion of values of rights and democracy? I suppose as the US withdraws to some extent, what is the scope? What's the prospect for how realistic is it that a country like Ireland can take up these challenges in the absence of the United States in ways that we've known of them, in ways that they've been previously?
I haven't thought about this. I mean, obviously, smaller countries have more limited influence, but they occasionally do punch above their weight, and a number of them have been quite influential on certain issues by sort of establishing credibility with the different parties, by establishing a mutual acknowledgement of neutrality, sort of not taking sides in any particular way. The most obvious place, of course, where Ireland can exercise disproportionate leverage or influence is vis-a-vis the United States because of the connection between the two countries. I think American politicians are more likely to pay attention to a diplomat from Ireland than a diplomat from some other parts of the world, precisely because of the impact of the Irish diaspora in our politics and the role that those connections play. So in a sense, the Irish approach should be not all that different from what I think has been the British approach all along, which is, you recognize that the United States is going to be doing a lot of things around the world, and you want to perch on our shoulder and whisper in our ear, hopefully with some sage advice on how we ought to think about it. And if we're wise, occasionally we'll listen.
Well, that's good to know. Just a question here from Dan O'Brien, and just back to Asia. Dan O'Brien is the chief economist here in the IAEA. He says, or asks, how significant are recent developments in Hong Kong? And do you think the US would react differently if it appeared that something similar was going to happen in Taiwan?
That's a hugely important question. So, first of all, the United States in general has not reacted to internal developments in China. We protested. I mean, go back to Tiananmen Square. We protested. We downgraded diplomatic relations for a time. But ultimately, I think we have recognized that when you are dealing with major powers, there are just real limits to how much you can shape what they do internally. But Hong Kong was slightly different because it was supposed to be under a different set of arrangements. Now, as sort of a foreign policy realist, I've always thought that the agreements on Hong Kong were not going to last forever, that as China became more powerful, eventually they might renege on them. But they have real implications for Taiwan because, of course, if the Chinese now try to say to Taiwan, look, please, let's have reunification. We'll let you have some special character. That's a much less credible promise to make now that they've, of course, altered the arrangements in Hong Kong. The Taiwanese have every reason to be skeptical of any assurances they might get about special treatment or special status or, one country, two systems or anything like that. So any kind of reunification, I think, became much harder as a result of what's happened in Hong Kong. I also believe the United States, for both political and strategic reasons, would act very differently in the event of any effort to impose coercively Beijing's control over Taiwan. And the American position since the 1970s here has been, quite clear. We were not opposed to voluntary reunification. If both sides wanted to get back together, that was fine with us, but we didn't want China to impose reunification. And I think that position would, any effort by China to do that would be strongly opposed by the United States.
Okay, Stephen, we've been speaking about state actors, obviously, and global institutions as well to some extent. But here's a question now on which we might finish off. It's from Alex Conway. He wants to know, Where do enormous companies like Facebook and Google feature in your vision, or in this vision of post-pandemic global world order? And does Professor Wall see them becoming more powerful or influential actors?
I'll go out on a limb here, and again, this is not my area of expertise, but I actually think that we may be sort of at, let's call it peak Google or peak Facebook. We've all benefited in various ways from these social media companies. People have enjoyed using them, have gotten benefits from them, etc. But I think there's also a growing recognition in many parts of the world that their political and social impact is not just positive. And that with anything, any agency, any corporation, any activity that can have this profound an effect on our politics and on our society does require some degree of control. Whether it means breaking some of these companies up, whether it means putting some restrictions on how they operate, exactly how we go about doing this, that's all up for grabs. But I think this idea that we would just treat them as corporations that were providing a service and let them make as much money as possible and let them act pretty much as they wished and let them put any content they want up on their platforms regardless of its consequences, I think there's a growing sense that that's not the right answer. What the right answer is what we're arguing about now, but I would guess that 10 years from now we will see most of those companies under greater restrictions, greater degree of control, altering their practices. I think they'll still be making tons of money, but I think they're going to be operating somewhat differently in many parts of the world, precisely because people now realize that the consequences of allowing them to sort of operate unchecked have not been uniformly positive.
Yeah, talking about, just go back to the nationalism issue. I mean, obviously you say that nationalism is likely to emerge as a stronger force post-COVID. But where does that then, I mean, as a country here, obviously devoted and about to take up the responsibilities within the Security Council of the United Nations, where does that leave? And I think you also spoke about the WTO needing reform. But where does it leave the multilateral world of the UN? I mean, is America simply going to just do its own thing, or is there still scope for a role by the multilateral organizations in the future, as there has been in the past?
Yeah, I think there definitely is. I don't see any contradiction between a world that where nationalism is a very powerful force, where different groups see themselves as belonging to a nation with particular interests and traditions and cultures, and a world in which multilateralism is a key element. That's, I think, a recognition that although we have these separate nations around the world and separate states, they cannot achieve their own selfish interests as effectively on their own as they can in partnership with others. Figuring out what the rules should be, figuring out how those arrangements or norms or institutions should be constructed is always a difficult diplomatic task. But the fact that we are existing in all these separate tribes doesn't mean we can't come up with ways of doing business together, ways of working together that are better than trying to operate solely on our own. So I don't see a tension, or at least a contradiction, between nationalism and multilateralism. I think of multilateralism as one of the strategies states can adopt to try and pursue their own aims in partnership with others. I like to think that's a view that will overall be, characteristic of American diplomacy, even if it hasn't been featured very much in the last few years.
Stephen, we're right on 2 o'clock here, Irish time, 9 o'clock Boston time. So I want to just say thank you to you for such a diverse, inspiring indeed presentation this afternoon. We do very much hope that some of these things that you forecast, particularly when you speak about a less open, less free, less democratic world post-COVID, that all of them don't come to pass, or may not come to pass in ways that surpass our worst fears. But in any event, clearly we're deeply indebted to you. We wish you the very best. We follow, obviously, the developments in the United States in particular, with a particular intensity over the next couple of weeks, but thereafter as well, of course. And we just look forward to being able to welcome you back, hopefully post-COVID. Whether we'd have that post-COVID world at that stage, it remains to be seen. But we certainly wish to extend a very warm invitation to you to come to Dublin, to the Institute at some time in the future when we can continue this discussion.
I look forward to it for many, many reasons. The world will be in a better place when that's a possibility, and I always welcome an opportunity to come to Ireland.
Thank you, Stephen. We appreciate it very much. Good afternoon.